So, welcome to the online talk series, Behind the Scenes, Conversations on Empirical Platform Governance Research. My name is Christian Katzenbach. I'm co-hosting this together with Paloma Viejo Otero and Joao Megalés. In today's session, we host Tom Divon and Carolina Are for their talk on platform gaslighting. Before I introduce Tom and Carolina properly, we always say at the beginning a few words about the series and the housekeeping rules to get us started. So, in this series, we are hosting researchers and colleagues whose work we admire and which inspires our work for a conversation about doing empirical work in that field. And with the series, we would like to complement the existing formats that we all regularly go to, probably conferences and workshops where we present the results, in most cases in quite polished formats. So we talk about the methods that we used successfully, the great results that we achieved with that, and discussing the results in the problematic contexts and worlds that we live in. And in this format, in our online talk series, we would like to give a bit more space to the challenges that we face underway. That's why we call it behind the scenes. We want to talk also about the problems and maybe the dirty decisions that we needed to take along the way. Yes, and with that, we move on finally to kickstart our conversation today with Tom and Carolina and their talk on platform gaslighting. Tom is a PhD candidate in the Department of Communication at Hebrew University, and Carolina is Dr. Carolina Are, an innovation fellow at Northumbria University's Center for Digital Citizens. And following both of your work for quite a while, I'm always really impressed to see kind of the diversity of approaches and topics that you inquire, and the diversity that you bring to the field of platform governance. And I'm really excited now to see your joint work on this issue and host this conversation today with both of you. So yeah, let's start. The floor is yours.
Thank you so much. Tom will be sharing the slides. So at some point I will do what they used to do during the pandemic in the UK and go next slide. So today we are going to introduce our paper on platform gaslighting, which is really a user-centric insight into how platforms use manipulation of reality as a communication strategy. We'll share quite a lot of academic gossip and behind-the-scenes struggles that came with the publication of this paper, which is why we're very grateful that you're allowing us this chance to do that in a session of almost group therapy. Next slide, please. We're starting with our origin story. So actually, the way that we decided to come together for this paper, it all happened at the Global Digital Cultures Conference in Amsterdam, where Tom, who's a fantastic networker, he always makes sure that nobody is alone at conferences and that people are connecting over their shared interests. He came to me after I gave a presentation on the platform governance of content by sex-positive content creators, sex workers, and educators. And he was like, this feeling of gaslighting that your creators, your participants are talking about when communicating with platforms and receiving notifications about their moderation, actually, my participants share that too. And those participants for Tom are obviously Jewish creators and Palestinian creators. And we are also both unlikely and unpaid intermediaries between platform companies and censored or mismoderated creators. So we shared that feeling of gaslighting when communicating with platforms that our participants talked about. So we decided to write about it. And when that happened, I thought it was a good idea to also include my boss, Professor Pam Briggs, who focuses on how technology impacts on people. Next slide, please. Gaslighting may sound like therapy speak. You may be really over the term if you've been dating a lot, but actually there's quite a lot of theory about it, both in the criminology/victim studies space and when it comes to institutional examples of injustice. Gaslighting is a form of internet partner violence where one partner punishes the other or coerces them by undermining their beliefs. And they do so with tactics such as denial, minimization, or ridicule of their experiences, making them feel irrational or insane, essentially saying, no, I didn't do that. You're crazy. You're imagining it. This has severe psychological impacts on people who then lose their trust in themselves and basically lose all of their confidence in their own lived experiences. But gaslighting can also manifest in institutional or professional settings. For instance, in the UK post office scandal, postmasters were told that they were tampering with the payment that they had to give to the post office, but it was actually the machines that were calculating that debt wrongly. Next slide, please. So how does that manifest in platform governance then? Well, the notion of black box gaslighting has already been used by Kotter to describe how platforms publicly deny censorship of users and leverage their opaque algorithmic processes to justify how they govern. They essentially exploit structural information asymmetries between them and users and them and civil society, contributing to these feelings of gaslighting. We broaden this term outside of shadow banning, which has mainly been the field and the moderation technique that gaslighting has been connected with, to discuss gaslighting as a broader strategy to avoid scrutiny, because platforms' communications are often intentionally confusing to the point where the editor of The Verge stopped accepting comments on background, so attributed to a mysterious spokesperson and not to an individual with a name, because they increase platforms' tendency to basically just avoid any sort of accountability and to create this opacity that helps them to shield and protect business secrets. Next slide, please. So Tom will now take you through the methods.
Yeah, so to carefully make sense of those voices we encountered, Carolina and I followed the approach we have always committed to as scholars, activists, and basically human beings, and it is to believe in people's lived experiences. And it might seem obvious, but it isn't. And as platforms critic, we are not immune to the very dynamics we challenge, and we can sometimes replicate them ourselves, as you will see further along the presentation. So to gain a more nuanced understanding of how creators perceive their daily existence on platforms, we employ this multi-method system, including interviews with 14 Jewish creators, 10 Palestinian creators, and 12 multi-topics creators. And you will hear more about their backgrounds as we go along in our findings. So we complemented this with a thematic analysis of 6 notable public responses from platforms, examining how they addressed users' concerns raised by media and civil society organizations. Case studies topics included TikTok's response to public criticism from Jewish organizations regarding its handling of anti-Semitic content, TikTok addressing allegations of bias in favor of pro-Palestinian content, or Instagram's reaction to accusation of shadow banning and censorship of pro-Palestinian content, particularly in relation to posts about the war in Gaza. So we identified recurring patterns such as denial, technical causes, and public apologies, which helped us understand strategies for addressing criticism and communities' perceptions. So now we want to take you on a brief journey through our findings. Our thematic analysis of interviewees' quotes reveals 2 key forms of gaslighting, shaped by the complex assemblages of creators' online experiences, as you can see in this diverse menu. The first is automatic gaslighting, and this refers to the invalidation of users' experiences through automated and algorithmic processes employed by platforms. And one of the most striking examples was when creators reported hate speech only to receive automated responses stating that the content did not violate any community guidelines. So we have here Jewish creators facing this type of behavior when reporting anti-Semitic content on TikTok, such as calls for violence against Jews, as seen in this quote. So apparently, according to TikTok, an image of an oven alongside a caption, "Bake it," did not violate community guidelines. Our interviewees felt powerless to report anti-Semitism and abuse as platforms repeatedly redefined for them what harmful content is. Their experiences highlight flaws in large-scale moderation and the well-known limitations of outsourced moderators in handling historically and culturally complex issues. Our second pattern is the power imbalances in content moderation. Here you can see Bella telling us when they produce content similar of that of big creators, these platform stars manage to get away with moderation. And those differences were particularly felt when the visibility or success of their content was damaged, diminishing their ability to attract audiences. This made them question the algorithm's inconsistencies in recommending posts. They felt overshadowed by bigger creators whose value to platforms seemed to diminish the importance of their own stories. So experiences of powerlessness led us to our third pattern, shadow banning and deprioritization of content without notification. Our interviewees expressed frustration with the platform's inadequate infrastructure around the reporting abuse and malicious flagging. For example, we see here members of sex-positive communities learning through a Telegram group that malicious flaggers were targeting their accounts. Their efforts to find solutions to the abuse through friends rather than directly through Instagram highlighted the platform's seeming disregard for users' feedback. And finally, we see this lack of a way to report abuse, like malicious flagging, paired with an automated appeals process. And this forms our fourth pattern. And when platforms deny that profiles are being flagged or shadow banned, while offering a flawed appeals system with little transparency or responsiveness, users are simply left in the dark, like Elias with their struggle of proof that you can witness here in our quote. And this uncertainty breeds doubt and isolation, making creators feel very manipulated, right? So we see here Elia trying to prove over and over again their identity. And now we are moving on to our second finding, which is the human gaslighting. And this refers to the direct communication between platform representatives and users. It involves a range of tactics that collectively invalidate and undermine users' perceptions of their struggle. Here we can see participants feeling gaslit by platforms when their appeals were ignored, forcing them to seek external help. Even when human intervention was involved, the process kept on being inconsistent and unpredictable. As you can see here in Reed's experience of conflicting messages about account restoration. The lack of transparency blurred the lines between automated and human support, leaving users feeling neglected and uncertain about their platform presence. Here we see platforms taking a band-aid approach to governance, restoring content and issuing apologies without addressing the structural issues. While those quick fixes offered temporary relief, they ultimately left creators frustrated as the same problems persisted. So what we have come to learn is about Jewish and Palestinian participants who shared with us that TikTok is actually persistently chasing them to join dedicated Zoom sessions where they are invited to discuss their struggles. Interviewees tell us that it feels like an act of excessive love, which is another nuance of gaslighting. It's this recognition that something is wrong, yet addressed with much attention rather than a real solution. And representatives often sidestepped responsibility and advised them, the creators, on how to avoid triggering the algorithm. A move that can feel less like a genuine support and more like shifting the burden onto the victim. Users also felt most frustrated when platforms dismissed or devaluated their knowledge and experience. So, for example, TikTok downplayed Jewish users' experiences of hate, despite them being highly visible in their comments. Interviewees questioned the platform's commitment to transparency and fair environment. And to fight this, Participants joined external communities to challenge TikTok's narrative by sharing evidence with one another. So they did so on a Facebook group where they're constantly teaching each other how the platform is mistreating their experiences. However, TikTok's reluctance to acknowledge those issues and its demand for continuous performance documentation left creators feeling unheard and very much exploited. And finally, we see a further layer of gaslighting involving guarded responses from platform representatives. So here, Palestinian participants sharing experiences from meeting with TikTok after October 7, discussing reduced visibility of Palestinian-related content. TikTok's interruption of the creator, as you can see here in the quote, is seen as kind of like an attempt to dismiss Palestinian concerns by redirecting from valid issues to unrelated accusations. TikTok's meeting aimed to create a safe home for affected creators, but also shape delusive expectations about their commitment to protection of those creators. And they're constantly shattering those expectations in creators' minds.
Right. So basically then, as Tom mentioned before, we complemented our different case studies and our different participants' experiences with 3 public examples, or actually no more, 6 public examples of gaslighting in platforms' public responses. We are just showing you 3 in the next slide, if you can. Yeah, thank you. Some of these were from both our different fields. For instance, the one at the top happened on the back of Meta's mass deletion of accounts in the queer, sex-positive, kinky, and sex-working community in London. A deletion that I was very much a witness to, because I then had to put all of these people in touch with Meta for these bans to be reversed. And basically, again, this very mysterious Meta spokesperson said that they allow things like that depict nudity within limits, but that these cases were all errors without specifying what error that was. Similarly, TikTok, and this time a named spokesperson, decided to say that their moderation in the case of Jewish and Palestinian context was not their own responsibility, but it was actually down to users who were creating hashtags, and therefore the visibility of content related to hashtags was entirely user generated, and it was not TikTok's fault if something was more popular than the other. And then lastly, Meta had to fix the blanket translation of Palestinian and Arabic bios on Instagram, because they were essentially translating that everybody was a terrorist. Next slide, please. So their responses in all of these cases mirror the patterns that we found when speaking to our participants, and that, again, can be likened to gaslighting. That vague response, attributing a mistake, an error, to just an isolated instance, obscuring their accountability and avoiding that accountability for what are really systemic issues within content moderation. Deflecting responsibility. So once again, shifting the blame for exposure, not to their own governance and their own algorithmic prioritization or demotion, but to user behavior, putting the burden on creators to navigate this space. And lastly, ignoring the harms of their mistaken governance or errors. Again, if you translate a whole ethnic group, a whole group of religious users to terrorism or terrorists just because your language team isn't working correctly, that has an impact on that population and on the way people look at them. So in all of these cases, platforms use these guarded responses or outright denials to minimize user experience by performing this care for them and for their safety and for their well-being, but without actually making changes to avoid all of these instances. It's not an isolated glitch. It's clearly a pattern. Next slide, please. So this serves as a whole communication strategy, we argue. A strategy that, whether it's intentional or not, it doesn't help. Because yes, it may help platforms maintain monopoly and avoid public scrutiny for a while, safeguard their public image, and avoid accountability. But at the same time, more and more audiences seem to not trust these companies and shielding behind this idea that by denying everything or like just attributing it to a singular case and an isolated incident, people are going to be okay with it. They are essentially lying to themselves. And on top of that, as I said, this has a massive impact on user experience, which we conceptualize on the back of literature as epistemic injustice, because it makes because gaslighting as a communication strategy makes platforms' misconduct unspoken and their authoritative figure impenetrable, preventing any real change and any real justice for users because they are weaponizing their technical and technological expertise against them. Next slide, please. So just wanted to briefly, before handing over to Tom again for our conclusion, talk about some takeaways from our experience of examining content by these communities. Next slide, please. Thank you. Having done a lot of research in content of a sexual nature, peer review boards, funding boards do tend to scrutinize us quite a lot, which is fine. We welcome that. It produces better research. But at the same time, that doesn't happen to research into other topics. And that creates that disparity where research on sex-related content is essentially shut down. This is also the case for covert methods and methods that protect the researcher from online abuse, for instance. Ethics boards sometimes, in my experience, shut this down, while actually in the age of the alt-right and networked harassment, we need to rethink this type of prejudice. And just in general, when researching on these types of content creators that are at high risk of both censorship and online abuse, we all need to be quite careful, for instance, in amplifying harm or even in exposing all of these creators to harm by putting their content without anonymizing it in papers, even though it's public on social media. And we also need to be really, really mindful of not outing their survival strategy by saying, these creators are doing this. Well, actually, if we do that, we may be preventing them from expressing themselves, from networking, and from working because we may trigger their deplatforming. And lastly, as someone that does a lot of work with creators and freelance, workers and with sex workers in particular, it's important to rethink the approach to paying participants. A lot of time that's seen as a way to incentivize them to take part, but also if you're taking up their time, an hour of their time, they could be working at that time. So I think to encourage their participation and their trust, it's important to pay them. Now handing over to Tom.
Yes, so this is the stage where we really need your comfort and hug, because we really want to share some frustration here, as Carolina already started and created this landscape. So actually what we want to say is that it's not just the creators are being gaslit by platforms, but it's just that we are, as researchers, are also experiencing gaslighting. And we see it as a recursive cycle where at each stage, the people trying to document harm are being systematically dismissed. So we start with creators being gaslit. This is the direct layer. It's where creators communicate harm, as we saw today in our talk, only to be dismissed of their concerns and experiences. And then we continue with us, the researchers, being gaslit. And this is the investigative layer. It's where researchers study those experiences and seek explanations from platforms who respond with the same dismissive tactics for us as well. This creates an epistemic trap. We struggle to validate the very experiences we set out to document because platforms control access to crucial data and dictate the terms of truth. And then we encounter all that jazz again with the peer review process, gaslighting us further. And this is the validation layer. And it's when we submit our findings and face skepticism from academic reviewers. Taken directly from this paper's review, we have some selected quotes for you of reviewers saying, So where is the proof if platforms deny it? Or maybe creators are just miscalculating their anecdotal experiences. And the real cherry on top was reducing it to a logistical hiccup with comparisons like, if your package is delayed, can you really say FedEx is manipulating you, or are they just an overly big and complex company? So the academic system, often reliant on platform-approved evidence, reinforces this trap by demanding proof that platforms refuse to provide. And it all leads up to how platforms control the definition of valid proof. And that control extends through every layer of this recursive gaslighting system we showed you. And what we're saying here is that despite overwhelming evidence of systemic harm, platforms refuse to recognize reoccurring patterns, treating each case as we said, as isolated mistake rather than part of a broader structural issue. At the same time, both platforms and academic reviewers dismiss creators' lived experiences because they don't fit traditional statistical or quantitative models of evidence. This reinforces an epistemic hierarchy where creators' testimonies and researchers' findings, despite how hard we try for it to be consistent, are seen as less credible than platform-approved data, which eventually remains inaccessible or manipulated. And hopefully this will spark our discussion now. And also a shout out for our CCSN network. Just a little bit of PR. We initiated a content creator scholars network, and we welcome you to join us for young voices, emerging voices in academia who are looking for home for their research and network, and we're here for that. And thank you so much.